So, picking up where we left off last time, a scientific theory must be falsifiable. If evolution claims to explain radical change over time while also claiming to explain radical stasis over time, then it is not falsifiable. It thus goes from being a scientific position to a philosophical one. Folks, living fossils do not support the theory of evolution. The fact that we are finding these creatures remaining the same over supposedly hundreds of millions of years of time strongly indicates that that amount of time is fiction. And if you don't have hundreds of millions of years to work with, there's not enough time for evolution to occur. And if we are not evolved, then we must have been designed. And you'd think that people would start realizing that this points exactly to the biblical version of history. But unfortunately, as this data comes rolling in and people are trying to figure out what to believe in this crazy world, we see exactly where the scientific community stands on this issue. Professor Scott Todd tells us, even if all the data points to an intelligent designer, such an hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic. In other words, it doesn't matter how many arrows of evidence would support or complement the biblical version of history, the scientific community is going to ignore it. Regardless of how much of this data adds up and adds up and adds up to the idea that there must have been a designer or a creator, they are going to close their eyes and ears to it. And that is really, really sad. Science used to be the search for truth, but instead science has become just a running hypothesis on how things could have gotten here without a creator. And of course, nothing could be further from the real truth. So, let's talk a little bit about ape men. So what you're going to write down from this slide is Nutcracker Man, along with the sub-bullet point number 2 and 4. And I'll just put little marks next to those. So we got Nutcracker Man, and then these two. I'm kind of surprised I didn't hear any giggling when I said Nutcracker Man. There it is. So this was one of those popular proofs that humans evolved from apes. It was supposedly one of the transitional creatures between an ape-like animal and a human. Discovered in 1959, popular proof that we evolved from apes. Now it's known to be from an extinct group of robust apes. So from this skull, they drew this, and believed this creature looked like, sort of an ape-human hybrid. Turns out it was just an overactive imagination. Ramapithecus. Same thing. You're going to write down the name Ramapithecus along with sub-bullet points numbers 2 and 4. And I don't need to repeat myself here. This is the same story as the previous one. This one was discovered in 1932. You can see it's a partial skull with a jaw there. And that was the data. That was the information. That was what was tangibly found. And from this partial skull, they drew this creature. It's like, that's an overactive imagination right there. And oftentimes, this is what the scientific community is guilty of when they're looking for these ape-human missing links. Next one is Piltdown Man, and you can see images of Piltdown Man down here. From this one, you're going to write down Piltdown Man, earliest Englishman, and the last bullet point there, fraud and forgery. And once again, it's the same story in general over and over and over again. So this one was discovered in 1912. If you were around in 1912, along with 4 decades after that, you would have seen this creature sculpted and displayed in museums along with the little pieces of skull and jaw. And it would say that this is proof positive that evolution is true and humans evolved from apes. It wasn't until 41 years later, by a deathbed confession, that one of the individuals involved admitted that the skull fragments were human and the jaw was from an orangutan with filed teeth to give it more of a human-like appearance. So, fraud and forgery is what happened here. And this kind of brings up the question, what would make people do this? Why, if you're a scientist, would you forge and file down these teeth and bring together skulls and jaws from different animals to try and convince people that it's an ape-human hybrid? And the answer to that question is rather simple. The scientific community believes somewhere in the fossil record there's this special transitional creature between apes and humans. And so if this creature is out there to be found, if you're the person to find it, you get fame, you get fortune. Never again will you have to worry about where you're going to get your research grants from. Your life will just be all set if you're the person to discover that. And so what ends up happening then is people make these mistakes, sometimes honest mistakes, sometimes not so honest. And this is the next one here, write down Nebraska man, along with the second and fourth bullet point again, touted as a missing link, and then lack of evidence. And the idea behind Nebraska man here is, look at this picture. This was a full-page spread on a popular magazine back in 1922. And this entire picture, these two individuals who supposedly are the ape-human hybrid that everybody's been looking for, that's all as a result of a single tooth. One tooth. I mean, you want to talk about an overactive imagination, you want to talk about lack of evidence, you're looking at it right here. But again, if you were around in 1922, you'd see these pictures and these sculptures and this evidence in museums as evidence of proof and proof positive of human evolution from apes. When in reality, after a lot more rigorous research was finally done, they figured out the tooth belonged to a pig. So again, everybody wants to be the person to find these missing links. And so when you're discovering these bones, in your mind, every bone starts to look a lot like that missing link one that you're looking for. And that's a big issue with this. And you'll see these things go as time goes along here. Because what usually happens is you see these ape-human hybrids, splashed across newspapers and social media. And it happens there once every 2 years. They've got a different idea of what the missing link was. But you'll often see that, but what you won't see is the retraction that comes about 3 months later after they've actually had a good amount of time to test that science and see if it's real or not. And that's the sad part. People go forward in their lives thinking this is all set and figured out, when in reality it's not. Just as a little cheat sheet for you here, because it's tough to keep these names the same, if the name has Homo in front of it, Homo sapiens, for example, it is a human. If it's got Australopithecus in front of it, it is an ape. Far and away, in general, there are a few exceptions here and there, but that's a good kind of rule of thumb to go by. The ape-human hybrid missing link they're talking about now is Homo habilis, so they think this might be the transition from Australopithecus to Homo, but actually it includes a lot of Homo erectus bones, but it's made up mostly of Australopithecus bones, and as said by evolutionary scientists, it's likely a false category, often described by them as a wastebasket or a grab bag. So if you have these bones, Australopithecus or Homo, and you don't know what category they fall in, you're probably going to say, well, it's Homo habilis. So it's kind of just this garbage bag of bones that nobody really knows what to do with. These are other popular examples of creatures that everybody thought was the missing link. But all three of those, along with several others, now it's been discovered that they are more different from humans and apes than humans and apes are from each other. So they are not the missing link either. Speaking of this picture, can anybody point out to me why it is that this creature looks kind of eerily human? The eyes, yeah. Apes did not have the white around their eyes right there. Humans do. So what museums will oftentimes do is they're going to take an ape face and they're going to pluck out the eyes and put in model human eyes. And it gives you that sort of eerie appearance. What about this guy? The teeth, absolutely. Right on the money. So, yeah, they often take out the human teeth, take out the ape teeth, and they put in human teeth. And so they're displaying these images as though they have all the evidence, when in reality, the evidence is not there. What you're seeing is dishonesty and deception, and you need to be aware of that when you go through these museums. Go ahead and write this down for me. Yep, the whole thing. Now, of course, we cannot talk about the fossil record without talking about dinosaurs. Write down, what about dinosaurs? Probably remember a good amount of this from a chapel earlier in the year. But when we're talking about dinosaurs, oftentimes, if people realize you're a Christian and that you believe the Bible, they'll say, well, what about the dinosaurs? As though that's this magical trump card that invalidates everything you believe in. When in reality, I think that dinosaurs are probably the best secular piece of evidence that point exactly toward the timeline that the Bible lays out for us. And you're going to see exactly why in just a short time here. Because if these dinosaur fossils really are 65 million years old, they ought to look 65 million years old. There are certain characteristics they should have. But if dinosaur fossils are just thousands of years old, as the Bible would indicate, then we would expect to find something else entirely. We'd expect to find evidence of youth. So what do we see? Go ahead and write this down, please. The whole thing. So when we take these dinosaur fossils and we dissolve away the mineral, what we're oftentimes finding is we're finding soft tissue, we're finding blood cells and blood vessels, we're finding intact DNA, we're finding unfossilized bone, we find muscle fibers and ligaments that are still stretchy. Folks, these are organic things. They break down very quickly over time. If they can't last for 1 million years, let alone 65 million, after that period of time, on a molecular level, they would have broken down to the point where you can't even recognize them anymore. And yet, here they are, staring at us, smack in the face. Yes?
You know how they're trying to, like, remake the mammoth or whatever?
Yes.
Can't they do that with, like, the T-Rex? Because they have to.
If they had enough DNA, they would. But I think the DNA has been broken down at least enough that they can't completely replicate it. But who knows what the future holds? Beyond that, though, we're finding these not just in like one special dinosaur, sample here. We find this in T-Rex. We find this in Triceratops. We found this in hadrosaurs. They're the dinosaurs with the weird-looking head things. We find these in duck-billed dinosaurs. Really many, many, many examples. Often really just when we're actually looking for it. It's exactly what we find. And the scientific community was just astonished when they found these there. And of course that points to a much younger Earth, a much younger dinosaur population that has been around a lot more recently than the 65 million years that we oftentimes hear about. But it's not just dinosaur fossils that point to these creatures having been around a lot more recently. From this slide, write down Roman army versus dragon, 256 BC. So when you look at cultures across the world, oftentimes what you'll find in their ancient histories is you'll find pictures or written records like this one here of encounters with these quote-unquote dragons. This is a record that was given to the Roman senator Quintus Aelius Tubero, and he's the one that documented it here. So I'm just going to read it to you, and we'll go from there. The consul Attilius Regulus, when encamped at the Begradus River in Africa, fought a stubborn and fierce battle with a single serpent of extraordinary size, which had its lair in that region. That in a might struggle with the entire army, the reptile was attacked for a long time with hurling engines and catapults, and that when it was finally killed, its skin, 120 feet long, was sent to Rome. Now, in the same way that, we look at the Gospels and you've got like 4 different, perspectives of the same story, each one kind of focuses in on a separate perspective of that period of time. The same thing is true here. There are actually 5 different accounts of this story. So I've got 2 of them here, and I'm going to read this one to you as well. This is from Titus Livius, Roman historian. The serpent of the Begradus River in Africa was of such a size that it denied the army of Regulus access to the river. Many soldiers it seized in its enormous mouth and crushed to death not a few of them with its whirling tail. It could not be penetrated by the missiles thrown at it. Finally, they attacked it with so many stones, launched from ballistae from every side, it was brought down by the weighty blows. So, a couple of things I want to point out as we look at these historical accounts here. First, the one from Senator Tubero. What I'm really looking for when I examine these stories are hints of authenticity here, because anybody can make up a story. So the thing that really jumps out at me from this version of the story is down here. Its skin, 120 feet long, was sent to Rome, and it was prominently displayed in Rome. A lot of people saw this. People could measure it. That's how they know the length. Things are very specific in this account, and that has a ring of truth and authenticity to it. Almost more importantly, though, from this account from historian Livius here, when you look at what's actually happening, you've got, at that time, the greatest, most powerful army that the world had ever seen up to that point in history. And this amazing army was bested in large part by a beast, not even a human army. This would have been profoundly embarrassing to this army, and especially to Regulus here. So they would not have shared this account, and they probably did so just because there was no way to avoid the fact that they lost so many people to this animal. So the fact that when we read this story, it's telling us something that these individuals would not have been proud of, that is a real big sign that this is authentic. And if you read the other 3 versions of it too, you can find other hints and clues, and I can direct you to those sources if you're interested. But it's not just written records either. When you examine sculptures and tapestries and carvings and embroidery and murals from ancient civilizations from all across the globe, you find these monstrous animals that just so happen to look exactly like the dinosaurs we find in the fossil record. This is a sculpture from China about 4,000 years ago. And if you know your dinosaurs, you know that this is a Centrosaurus. Apparently nobody told the ancient Chinese that they were separated from these dinosaurs by 65 million years. Same period in China, same area. If you know your dinosaurs, you know that this sculpture is an example of an adolescent Protoceratops. Again, the similarities between these things goes beyond the ability to say that this is just a coincidence. They can't be that accurate and not have seen this animal for themselves. And it's not just China. Like I said, it's all over the world. This is a Mayan mural, and if you look, they're all wearing like hats of like real animals. And you got a fish here. It looks like that's some sort of anteater or an elephant or something. Some kind of leopard there. You've got a puma. And then in the bottom left, we've got this thing. What does that look like? What was that? Like a raptor, yeah. If I zoom in, you can see it even better. So it's like, how did the ancient Mayans know exactly what a raptor looked like? This is like straight out of Jurassic Park. And this supposedly went extinct 65 million years ago? I don't think so. Now, the scientific community will often say, well, this is just a mythological thing from that tapestry, from that mural. But, you know, if I go back here, again, these are all real animals in the rest of the picture. Does it really make sense that they'd have all these animals that are legit and then just make that one up? No. And one more example, and just to... Oops. Yeah. For the sake of trivia, in Jurassic Park, with those raptors, real velociraptors are only about the size of a chicken. The real dinosaurs from Jurassic Park are actually this guy right here, Deinonychus. A lot of people don't know that. I like the name Velociraptor better too, which is why they used it for the movie. But yeah, if you're ever in a trivia contest and that would come up, they're actually not velociraptors from the movie. So this is an engraving from Carlisle Cathedral in England, and you can see pretty clearly what's right there. I mean, these depictions of dinosaurs are exactly what we would see from a dinosaur in a museum. They're so similar you could ask any adolescent what they're looking at. Not only will they tell you it's a dinosaur, they'll probably tell you the exact type of dinosaur it is. And this one would be, you know, those long-necked sauropod dinosaurs, Volcanodon to be more specific. But I do want to mention something in addition to this. The scientific community at one point said, there's no way this could be a real sauropod dinosaur. They were so big and their tails were so massive, they would not have elevated their tails. That makes no sense. But now we know that these dinosaurs had to elevate their tails in order to help them balance while they were walking. So not only does this carving accurately represent a sauropod dinosaur, it represents accurate posture in that dinosaur. These are things that they could not have drawn if they hadn't seen these creatures for themselves. It can't be that accurate. It just can't. And there are so many more examples of this. If you're interested, I have a book, Dire Dragons by Vance Nelson. It's an amazing, amazing resource. There are literally examples like this over every continent. Every ancient culture has them. And ultimately what this comes down to then, we were not separated from these dinosaurs by 65 million years. And if we're not separated from these dinosaurs by 65 million years, then there's not enough time for evolution to occur. I mean, remember, we supposedly evolved from an ape-like creature just 5 million years ago. So you need those 65 million years for that, along with the rest of evolution to work. And so what we're finding here is that if we walk this earth with dinosaurs, evolution is falsified. And we see evidence of humans and dinosaurs walking this earth together all over the place. We did walk this earth together. Remember, humans and dinosaurs were created on the same day of the creation week, on day 6. They would have been on the ark, and they would have come off the ark and existed with us for at least a while afterwards. One interesting thing about dinosaurs on the ark is they did not start out like massive. They were not birthed as being absolutely massive dinosaurs. So you would not expect to see an adult sauropod on the ark if you lived back then. Chances are you would have seen an adolescent. What we now know is that these dinosaurs, even the massive ones, were hardly bigger than a human in their adolescent stages. After their adolescence, they'd go through a huge growth spurt. So chances are, with these big dinosaurs, they were probably much smaller adolescents that God brought to Noah on the ark. So then why don't we find human fossils buried with dinosaur fossils? Write this down and we'll talk about it. So just to kind of touch on this, we're going to talk a lot more about the geology of how this works when we get to the geologic record in the next chapter. But humans, being God's most resourceful and intelligent creation, would have been able to last a lot longer than almost pretty much every other animal on Earth. So humans in general, we'd expect to be buried last from those floodwaters. And again, the rock layers that we find fossils in were laid down as a result of Noah's flood. We'll talk more about that in the next section. And because we'd be buried last, we'd be in those topmost fossil layers. So if we were in those topmost fossil layers while the waters were at their peak, well, guess what? Those waters eventually got to go somewhere, and eventually they ran off into the ocean basins as they sank. And so as the water rushed into the ocean basins, you're going to have all sorts of erosion happening. So those topmost layers that would have had the human fossils in them probably just got eroded and washed out into the oceans as the waters were receding to those locations. Furthermore, go ahead. There really weren't a ton of people around, most likely. Genesis 6:11 tells us that the earth was corrupt in God's sight and that it was filled with violence. So a lot of people were killing each other back then. It might have been a small population, perhaps just, tens of thousands. So in terms of the range of the population before the flood, 10 million people is really on the high end of that, the very high end. So let's just assume that there were 10 million people around at that time. And we're going to assume that every single one of them was fossilized as a result of that. If that would occur, then you would expect to see one human skeleton for every 17 cubic miles of rock. That's saying that that's a needle in a haystack is an understatement right there. Obviously, animals have much shorter generation times, so that's why we're finding so many animals. They had a much larger population than humans. It doesn't surprise us that we have not found any fossilized human remains, although it wouldn't surprise us if we did come across one or two. And again, fossilization simply means these fossils are mineralized. These bones have minerals surrounding them or embedded in them. So any questions on this before we wrap this up? Here is our summary for the fossil record. Smell spring break? No? As of right now, it's exactly 5 minutes away. So yeah, as you're writing this down, I'll just point out a few things. Transitional fossils are absent from the fossil record. The ones that you find on Google can be explained through natural selection or speciation. Fossils of ape men are always sensationalized, and again, the reason that they sensationalize those is number one, they really want to find that ape-human hybrid. They really want to find that missing link. And number two, there is a big motivation for that because you're instantly famous. You instantly never would have to worry about anything financially over the course of your life. These living fossils, supposedly millions of years old, even hundreds of millions of years old, look the exact same as their now living counterparts. And of course, if you're going to say these things stayed the exact same over hundreds of millions of years of time, and at the same time say that everything changed rapidly over hundreds of millions of years of time, you're contradicting yourself. And that's what we find in the theory of evolution. Dinosaur fossil reconstructions look just like historical dragons from cultures across the world. Of course, you saw those examples. And again, if this even, is a little bit interesting to you, feel free to check out this book. It's on Amazon. You're welcome to borrow mine. Really cool stuff in there. And finally, dinosaur fossils have features that can only be present if they died just thousands of years ago. You should not still be finding muscle fibers that are still stretchy in animals that died 65 million years ago. Based on observational science that we do in the present, we know that that organic material simply can't last that long. They must have been around a lot more recently. And if they've been around a lot more recently than 65 million years, that doesn't bode well for the grand story of evolution, or the naturalistic philosophy on which it's based.